understanding the basics of advertising management and how this entire course is structured. And in order to understand that, the most important thing that we need to understand is the 5M framework, because the entire advertising management process revolves around the 5M framework. And the 5M framework provides a very stable and systematic approach to make decisions in the field of advertising management. So, without much ado, we will move on to the 5M framework. So, the first and the foremost in these 5M framework is basically the mission. Now, the most important thing about advertising is, why do we advertise? That is what advertising mission is all about. So, basically, we are interested in knowing what are our objectives or what are our goals. Unless and until we know what our goals are or what our objectives are, we will not be able to move ahead with the decision making process. So, the first and the foremost thing is, what is our mission? What do we want advertising to do for us? Because advertising has a specified task. Every company that we know of does not have unlimited resources. Every company spends money in advertising, because advertising is a form of paid communication which helps build the brand of the company. So what does the company want? That is basically very important. What are we advertising for? Is it to create awareness about a new brand? Is it to create an image for the brand? Is it to generate sales? So this is basically what we call as the mission. So mission is basically the goal and the objective of the advertising. The second and the most important element, as I would consider is that is the money part. How much money do we have? Because in order to meet our objectives, we need to have money. So what we need to understand is that how much money do we have at our disposal? That is a very important and significant step. So in this particular domain, in the money part, we are basically talking of advertising budgeting. And there are different ways to budget for. We will discuss that in later stages as we move along. Then comes your message part. That is the physical, the creation of the ad, the campaign, the advertisements that you see in the newspapers, the advertisements that you see on the social media, the advertisement that you see on television, the advertisement that you hear on the radio. They are the part of the message strategy. Who do we target? What kind of messaging should it be? What kind of appeal should we use? So when you see a message, you come across different kind of ads. The ads could be humorous, the ads could have a fear element in them, the ads could have some emotional appeals in them, the ad could have some rational appeals. So we'll discuss the message part, which will be in which will basically mean what is the message that we are trying to convey. That is the basic advertisement itself, the physical ad, and how do we create that. So basically it will have two components: the creation of the ad, it will have the creation of the ad part, and the underlying strategy behind that particular creation. Then once this has been done, we'll move on to the next stream of advertising, which is basically called as the media. In the media, we cannot have advertising in isolation. We need to have an appropriate media for that. It could be the print media, it could be the television media, and there are a lot of decisions which are supposed to be made as far as the media is concerned. So in this, we'll have an entire discussion on the media strategy, media planning, and we will discuss different components. Who do we advertise? When do we advertise? What are the timings? How many times do we advertise? And related concepts. So as we move along, I'll discuss this in detail. And then comes the last part of advertising management. Last but not the least. Why? Because advertising measurement is basically understanding how effective our advertising has been. Advertising traditionally has been very difficult to measure. The impact of advertising has been very difficult to measure, because in real world setting, it is not very easy to isolate the impact of advertising, because there are many other variables which are at work. I mean, it could be the price. I mean, if the price is very low, the consumers may flock for a rival brand. If the distribution is very poor, the consumer may not buy your brand even though the advertising is very, very good. Similarly, there are many other variables which actually impact the final sales. So measuring advertising or the advertising effectiveness is not very, very easy. So, but from a manufacturer's perspective, from a corporate client's perspective who is spending money on advertising, measurement has to play a very, very critical role. They would want to know where their money is being spent. So as we move along, as you can see, we have now a very nice diagram which actually elaborates all these things. As you can see, so mission. So if you look at the mission part, it has basically two types of objectives. As I said, mission basically means your goals and objectives. So broadly speaking, advertising mission can be divided into two types of objective. One is the sales as an objective or sales as a goal, or the other is basically your communication objectives, which we call as advertising objectives. What do we mean by sales as a goal? The basic idea here is to sell the product. The basic idea that we want to have here is to sell the product. That is, there is no other communication objective. We are not trying to communicate anything. The primary objective is to sell. So many times when we go across, let's say when you are traveling or when we go to a mall, what do we see? Many times we see point of sale displays. What do we see? We see a it could be a small ad on the counter or outside the mall or inside the mall, 50% off, up to 50% off. What is the basic idea behind this? The basic idea behind this is not to communicate anything except communicate the fact that there is a sale on, and the consumer should come in and he should avail the price discount or whatever it might be, buy one get one free or something of that kind. So he should come in. So the idea is to precipitate sales. So that is sales as an objective. So that is, many advertisers, they advertise, they spend money because their objective is to generate sales. But apart from that, if you look at the second classification, that is, as you can see on the screen, is advertising objectives, that is communication as an objective. Many times it can so happen that you are actually trying to change your brand. Like for example, in India, we had many examples. We had Hutch, which became Vodafone, and so on and so forth. The brands, they changed their brand name. So their objective is to not sell at that point of time. Their objective is to communicate this to the consumers, to their audience. So what is the advertising objective here? The advertising objective here is to communicate to the audience that we were earlier Hutch and now we have become Vodafone. So the company advertises, they make ads and they air those ads, or those ads are put in the print media, they're published in the print media or on the social media, so that the consumers become aware that now Hutch has become Vodafone, right? So that is one of the things. The other thing which is very important for us to understand is that there are so many other communication level objectives, not only brand awareness. The idea is to create the right impression of the brand, to create an image of the brand. For example, if you look at global brands, there is the classic, the Marlboro Cowboy. Marlboro is a cigarette brand, and it's a very famous, iconic American brand where you have the Marlboro Cowboy. The cowboy has created an image for the brand that Marlboro cigarette is for the rough and tough. It is for somebody who's maverick, somebody who's unbounded, the true American spirit. So America was initially a colony, and over a period of time, there was this explosion. Later half of the America, that is the Wild West, was explored, and there were pioneers who trod the path, and ultimately America is what it is today. It was because of the free and the pioneering spirit of the Americans. So that Marlboro Cowboy actually signifies he is a typical American. So that is what the brand is all about. So the brand is trying to create an image about itself. So that is what we call as one of the objectives of advertising, which communication level objective, and that is what we call as building the brand image. Similarly, there could be other building the brand preference. So as we go along, we'll be discussing these things in details. Now, as I said previously, as we saw in the last slide, the second most important element is the budgeting. And in budgeting, there are different forms of advertising budgeting, which we'll be discussing because it depends on the industry. In many industry, the number of or the amount of money that you spend or the number in terms of percentages or in terms of unit, it all depends on the industry. So based on the industry, you set your advertising budgeting and you decide that this is my budget and this is the amount of money that I am going to be spending in promoting and communicating about my brand. So it is all about brand communication and the amount of money that is required to actually do the job. So that we'll be covering in the money part, which we'll be discussing at a later stage. Now, in terms of message, as I said in the previous slide, what is very important here is to understand that what is the big idea behind our advertising campaign. This is all about creative strategy. So when we talk of message, it is about the ad itself. So how do we create the ad? What is the process? Who creates the ad? There are different elements which are there. How do we bring it all together? The copywriter, the art director, everybody is involved. There are different departments which are involved in creating the ad. So ultimately, what is very important for us to understand is that the critical and the most important task, that is creation of the ad, which is obviously it's a very, very creative thing, takes place in the creative department. It is basically in the creative department where the ads that we see are created. And now once we have created the ad, we have to, we have to air that ad either on the radio or on television, or we have to publish them in newspapers, magazines, social media, or out of home advertising in the form of billboards and other elements. So that is that is what we call as the media strategy, and that involves planning. What timing? Like for example, you cannot, if it's an ad which is targeted towards children, you cannot advertise on, let's say, after prime time, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the night, because the students or young children are asleep by then. So nobody is going to watch their ads. So ultimately, what is important is to know that what should be the timing. Things like what is a TRP, what is GRP, when do we advertise, which newspaper do we advertise in, which has more reach, which has more frequency, which has more impact. These are the decisions, the strategic decisions that we have to, undertake in this particular. So for example, most of the advertising agencies that we know of have a separate media department which is responsible for this particular task. So each and every advertising agency will do this, and sometimes many advertising agencies, they take the help of outside agencies also. So that is not very significant. As we move along, we'll discuss that. But what is important is that there is a media decision, which is the fourth M of advertising, not the fifth, but the fourth M of advertising. That is, we need to understand that what are specific elements, like which newspaper has a bigger reach, what should be the number of exposures, or how many times do we advertise. Like for example, when recently we had an IPL, so after every break we did see a lot of ads. Every break after an over or after the power play, we would see that there would be ads. So this is what we call as the frequency. So if a same ad is being repeated over and over again, that is what we term as frequency. Okay, so which obviously we'll be discussing at a later stage in great detail. Then we come to specific media vehicles and media types. So these are some important decisions which are to be made in the media. Then, like I said, what is important from the perspective of the company which is advertising? That is the client. Like for example, Coca-Cola, they advertise, Pepsi-Cola, they advertise, they're spending money. They would want to know what this advertising is doing for them. So ultimately, measurement becomes a very, very important thing. But at this point of time, let me tell you, most of the advertising agencies, they say that we are creative agencies, we do creative work. Our creative work is not open to criticism or measurement. We are the masters of creativity, and ultimately we will decide whether the work is creative or not. Because As I said a few minutes back, that the sales is determined by so many other variables apart from advertising. It could be the distribution, it could be the pricing, it could be the physical location of the stores. So ultimately, sales is dependent on advertising, but not in a very significant way. There are many other variables which impact the sales. So ultimately, advertising agency says that we did the job, but your distribution was very, very poor. We created a demand for the product. The consumers are demanding the product, but you are not available. That is, your product is not available. You do not have a distribution outlet. Many times it so happens. For example, I am very fond of, let's say, I am very fond of Mishti Doi, which is manufactured by Amul. So I go to my neighborhood shop and I ask him, do you have Mishti Doi? He says, no, there is no supply. I mean, the supply is very erratic. So what happens? Now, Mishti Doi is something which is obviously not a lifesaver kind of thing. So ultimately, what I'll do is I'll buy an alternate product. Okay, I'll say if there's no Mishti Doi, give me normal Doi, or give me normal, give me ice cream or something else. So there's something called as share of the stomach, share of the mind. So if coffee is not available, I'll take tea. Similarly, if Mishti Doi is not available, I'll take some substitute. I'll not wait for Mishti Doi for 10 days, 20 days. It is not like, I'm buying a car that I've decided that I want to buy a Rolls Royce, and if Rolls Royce is not available, I'll go and buy any other car. I'll wait for Rolls Royce. So it also depends on the product category. So ultimately, advertiser, the client, they are interested in knowing what has advertising done for us, and the ways through which we measure this impact, we call this as communication effect, communication effect, or we call it as the sales effect. So in the sales effect, what are we trying to do is we are trying to find out the impact of the advertising campaign on sales. So if sales is an objective, and if sales is not an objective, if brand awareness, brand recall, brand recognition, these are the things which are the objectives, then we will measure them and we will categorize them under the communication impact, as we can see on the slide. So as we have been speaking, I'll take one of these, each one of the M's one by one, and we'll discuss about them in more detail. So as you can see, mission is basically about defining your objectives and your goals. What do we want advertising to do for us? So ultimately, as I've said, no company has got unlimited resources. Every company has got limited resources, whether they are for profit, non-profit. They all spend money on advertising because they have a specific goal or objective in mind. They want advertising to do something for them. It could be in the form of sales, increasing the sales, or it could be in the form of a communication level. When we say communication, we are trying to communicate something to the audience, and our primary objective is communication about that. That is, we are trying to build an image, we are trying to build a personality, we are trying to increase the recognition, we are trying to build the recall, we are trying to communicate something that this brand is very good, this brand is very reliable, this brand is quality. So that is what we call as a communication level objective. So the basic idea is that the mission, as we can see on this particular slide, refers to the core purpose of an advertising campaign. That is, what do we want our advertising to do? Do we want it to sell the product, which is our primary objective, which could be a primary objective, or do we want our advertising to communicate something to the audience? So once we have decided on this, and there are different, as I said, there could be different objectives. It could be creating brand awareness. That is, when we are introducing a new to the world brand, we are trying to create awareness. If we are introducing a new to the world product, we will try to create awareness about that particular product. I remember when we had those traditional video cassette tapes on the big VHS players, they were later replaced by CD compact disc players, or we had the television, the big television sets, which were replaced by LED and LCD television sets. So there was a campaign by companies about why LCD is better and why should consumers switch from or dump their old television sets, the bulky television sets, and move on to LCDs and LEDs. LEDs came in later. after some time. But initially they were the LCDs and they were plasma television sets. So the consumer had to spend a huge amount of money in terms of replacing their old television sets, because consumers are always in an inertia. Unless and until something convincing is offered to them, they are not likely to switch to another product or to another brand. So the brand has to give them a compelling reason, and that compelling reason is, when you have a new to the world product, is when you educate the consumer that this brand is better or this product is better than the previous product that you were using. Then only they will, and when you are able to reinforce this in the mind of the consumers, then only they will buy the new product or the brand. Sales, as I said, sales could be a major objective. As we can see on the screen, sales could be one of the major objectives. A lot of companies advertise specifically because they just want to precipitate sales. So their primary objective is to sell. There could be secondary objectives, but the primary objective is to generate sale, that we advertise 50% off, sale is on, things like that, and the consumers are likely to come and they are likely to buy the brand. So that is the basic idea, to generate store sale, to generate brand sale, things like that. So that is when we call off, we call that as sales as an objective. Then other things could be building brand loyalty. Advertising plays a very, very important role in building brand loyalty. Now, brand loyalty is a concept which students of marketing should be knowing, but nevertheless, loyalty means that you are loyal to a particular brand even though the brand may not be available. Like for example, in certain cases, brand loyalty can be very, very high. I'll just give you some example. Like for example, uh, the local barber where you get your haircut, or the local saloon. And within the saloon, you may have a choice of a particular, like for example, many saloons that I know, the saloons that I use, they do not have one single barber or hairdresser. They have 3, 4 who are operating. So when I go to I always make sure that I go to my particular saloon. And once I go to that saloon, I make sure, even though I have to wait, I make sure that the hairdresser or the barber who actually trims or cuts my hair is free, and only then I will sit in the chair and get my hair and get a haircut. This is what you call is loyalty, that you wait for the brand, because ultimately brand loyalty plays a very, very important role, which we'll be discussing as we move along. What does brand loyalty do? Brand loyalty saves you from your competitors. Like in the case of, I gave you the example of Mishti Doi. That is, I go to the shop and I ask for sweet dahi. If the sweet dahi is not available, I'll buy something else. I go to the shop and I ask for Pepsi Cola. If Pepsi Cola is not available, I'll buy Coca Cola because they're similar in terms of taste and flavor. But like for example, Thumbs Up, you have brand loyal consumers. Thumbs Up has got a different taste, and that is the reason why consumers, and not only the taste, the brand itself, the Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they are associated with the youth, whereas the Thumbs Up brand is more, a tough, a macho brand. So those consumers who identify themselves as having a different taste, tough, macho, they tend to buy Thumbs Up. So if Coca-Cola and Pepsi Cola is not available, Thumbs Up is not available, they will not buy Coca-Cola and Pepsi Cola. They will go to another shop. This is what we call as brand loyalty. So what does brand loyalty do for a company? What does it do? It actually helps generate revenues. A Pepsi consumer can easily switch to Coca-Cola. What happens if Pepsi Cola is not available? He will buy Coca-Cola. What happens? Pepsi Cola loses in sales. But in the case of Thumbs Up, the consumer is brand loyal. The company does not lose sale because the consumer goes to a next outlet or to another shop to buy Thumbs Up. So this is something which we need to understand, that brand loyalty provides a cushion to the company, and it wards off competition and competitive moves and competitive practices to a certain extent. So that is why one of the major objectives of advertising is to build brand loyalty. And brand loyalty can be built in many ways by associating brands with positive things, positive qualities, and all that is done through brand communication. And when we talk of brand communication, the major communication tool which is available to marketers is advertising. So as we go along, we'll discuss integrated marketing communication, and I'll discuss in detail the different tools which are available. So those are the important things that you need to understand, that brand loyalty can be one of the main communication objectives of many companies, depending on the their key overall strategic objectives. Sometimes the company launches new products. As I've said a few minutes back, that the company launches a new product and the product is new to the world. So the company needs to invest. And the company, generally, when it's a new to the world product, the technology is available with only one or two company. So it is basically a single company which bears the brunt of educating the entire set of consumers and or potential consumers. So they spend a huge amount of money in advertising and educating consumers about the benefit of this new product. Generally, we have substitute products. But what happens when a new product comes into the marketplace? Like for example, in the 90s in India, we had mobile phones come in. Now, when we talk of mobile phones, the benefit of mobile phone was, or it was clear to everybody. Everybody knew what a mobile phone could do for you. So little education was required. But the majority of the products require a lot of education. For example, LCD and plasma. Which is better? Why should one opt for LCD? Why should one opt for plasma? Why is LED better? Why is OLED better? The consumer is not aware. He needs education. Similarly, in the case of laptops, different laptops come with different configuration. The consumer is not a technical person, so he needs education. Which kind of laptop do I need to buy? So advertising provides all this information to the consumer. So majority of the times, if it is about a laptop ad or if it is about a mobile phone ad, you'll find a lot of information in the ad itself. The specifications would be listed, sometimes the price may even be listed, the RAM will be listed, the processor will be listed, the screen will be listed, the size would be listed, the weight would be listed. Why? Because the consumer is looking out for these kind of information because he wants to make a decision. For somebody, portability may be very, very important. For somebody, speed may be very, very important. For somebody, the display may be very, very important. For somebody, the looks may be very, very important. So all this is being done by advertising. So many times we'll come across ads which provide a lot of information. The idea is that the consumer is looking out for this information, and we have to provide, as a company, as an advertiser, we have to provide this information to the consumer so that it facilitates his purchase decision or their purchase decision. So the first step of advertising is basically the mission, which is nothing but defining your objectives and goals in terms of what do you want advertising to do. Do you want to precipitate sale, that sales is an objective, or you want to communicate something about the brand, which could be about the awareness, which could be about the product attributes, you want to build brand loyalty, you want to educate the consumers. So that broadly comes under the category of communication level objectives. So we have two categories. One is called as the sales level objective, the other is called as the communication level objective. We have already had a look at the second of M of advertising in the previous slides. So second of advertising is basically the money. When we say money, we want to clearly say that we want to understand what would be the advertising budget. So when we have an objective in mind, for example, if we want to sell, we need to have ads, and we need to have those ads in the air, or we need to have those ads in the print or the social media. So that involves money. How many times we are going to advertise, that also involves money. And we have to create the ad, that also involves money. So ultimately, things like your campaign reach. So ultimately, how many people do you want to reach? If it is a campaign for educating consumers, so you want to reach as many people as possible. So ultimately, you would have to spend more. Then how many times do you want to advertise? Because ultimately, a person may not be exposed to an ad. And let's say I advertise once only in a week. So the person may not be exposed. So obviously there are scientific ways of determining what should be the reach, what should be the frequency, and what should be the trade-off between these, because reach comes at at the expense of exposure, and exposure comes at the expense of reach. So all these things are interlinked, and then we have to choose the media, and we have to look at the return on investments and everything. So these are the decisions that we take in the second FM advertising, which we call as money, which basically means budgeting for advertising. Then the most important, I would say, element of the entire advertising management is your crafting the ad. That is the message part. The third of M of advertising is the message part. And we need to understand what is being communicated and how that is going to be communicated. The what, the big idea. How are we going to create? Like, for example, we look at ads like the Raymonds. The Raymonds have this campaign, The Complete Man. And it has been an enduring campaign for the last 30, 40 years. We see that the Complete Man campaign is doing wonders for the Raymond. So that's the big idea, the Complete Man. And how do they execute this in the print, in television, on social media? And that is basically the job. That is what we do in the third M of advertising. How do we craft the right message so it actually resonates with the target audience and helps build the brand and it achieves their objective? How do we present it? So those are the things. What should be the tone? What should be the advertising appeal? What should be the advertising strategy? Should we use fear? Should we use humor? Should we use something else? Should we use emotional appeal? Should we use some other form of appeal? There are so many ways of appealing to the consumers. So as we come to those, the third arm of advertising, when we will be discussing this in great detail, we'll discuss all those appeals and how the ads are created and how they are executed. Fourth theme of advertising, which we have been discussing, which means how do we deliver the message? We have created the message, we have created the ad, but unless and until we have the media, we will not be able to air the ads. So unless and until we have the appropriate media or the medium, we will not be able to air that. So the decision as to what should be the media basically is the media strategy and the media planning part which is involved, whether we are going to go for television. Television, as we know, has seen lots of ups and downs. Right now, television is not as popular as the social media, but at one point of time, television was the most popular medium of advertising, of building and creating brands. Similarly, print and radio are also on the way out. Newspaper readership, magazine readership, like, are all going down. So it is not as powerful a medium as it used to be at one point of time. So we have to keep in mind with the changing landscape. Similarly, social media has gained traction in the last 3-4 years, especially after the COVID pandemic. Especially if you look at the entire advertising industry, the COVID pandemic was one of the milestones, or I should say turning point, because when it was COVID, a lot of people used to work from home. Many people purchased laptop, many students purchased mobile phones. So ultimately, social media gained traction in those days. And social media is here to stay. Majority of the companies are moving from traditional advertising to social media advertising to build brands, because social media advertising offers you a lot of advantages, lot of flexibility, cheaper, and you can specifically pinpoint and target your potential customers, potential audience. It is very easy these days to reach specific and niche markets like students, college students, university students, school children. Earlier that was very, very difficult. So social media has opened up a lot of avenues for advertisers. And outdoor and digital advertising, as we have been seeing all along. For example, if you watch a cricket match, you see a lot of digital and outdoor advertising. We are going on a highway, we see a lot of billboards. We are moving in the city. So this is all clubbed under the banner of OOH, which is called as out of home advertising. Last but not the least, as we have been discussing all along, is basically the measurement. Ultimately, like I have said in previous slides, ultimately it's all about, from the perspective of the advertising company, the client, they would want to know where they are spending the money. And as I said, advertising agencies are not very keen on this particular part, because advertising agencies are the agencies which create the ad. For them, they say that we are the creative people. We are the creative and we have created the ad. We know this is a very good ad. Whether the ad is doing the job for you or not, is not something which can be, like I said, not very can be easily evaluated, for the simple reason that the sales of the product, the final sales of the product is dependent on so many variables. So ultimately, what is important is to understand whether the ad has been able to reach a lot of people or not. This can be easily measured. Whether the ad has been able to change attitudes, has been able to build brand loyalty, has been able to build brand preference, has been able to engage audience or not, has it been able to convert people, and things like whether it has been able to enhance the brand recall, or whether people are likely to remember the brand, whether the brand has a top of the mind awareness. These are the things which are there when we talk of measurement. So if we look at this particular slide, we can clearly see how the 5 M's of advertising actually work together. So we start with the mission, that is basically your advertising objectives, the money part, the advertising budgeting, the message is the creative part. Media, it revolves around the identifying and choosing the right media. It is basically essentially deals with media planning, the media strategy, and then the measurement, which is basically the understanding the or measuring the impact of the advertising, or ensuring whether the advertising is, or finding out whether the advertising is effective or not. So at the end of this particular session, campaign success depends on the strength and alignment of all these 5 elements working in harmony. That is the most significant part. So all these have to work together to have a perfect campaign. These elements have to be there. Even then, the campaign may not do the job for you, but these elements have to be there and they have to work in synchronization. So you need to know your advertising objectives. You need to be very, very clear as to what you want advertising to do for you. Similarly, you need to appropriate, or you need to have appropriate funds. You need to allocate appropriate funds to accomplish the task, and you need to create the right kind of advertising, which is the physical creation of the ads, and you need to choose the right media. You need to have the right media strategy, and you need to have the right planning for your campaign to be successful. And ultimately, to understand whether this campaign has been effective or not, you would likely want to measure the effectiveness of the entire advertising campaign. And there are so many ways through which that can be done. So that is all for the first session. We will move on to the next session.